look into what I call paraphrasing the periodic table of elements. What you can see first is obviously there's this idea of it being periodic, the elements being periodic. They're metals as well, I guess they're non-metals. Metal, this is kind of, is a, like you've met all of what you need to within a period. I guess looking at periodic as well, another word is cyclic. And so it's kind of like this type of aspect of it. So the first element is hydrogen. So we have hydrogen, and you can imagine what hydrogen is like. What does it do in our period? What does it do to the period when there's lots of hydrogen? Maybe there's like lots of energy. This type of cliche energy, type of is cliche in the period and cyclic in period as well. So obviously next is helium, and that helium is obviously that makes things gives you a higher voice, or it makes things lighter. That type of periodic effect has taken me to create begin to create a reciprocal table of elements. So this is the next one. Afterwards is the next one, how it kind of came through. So where there's periodicity in the periodic table of elements, there's reciprocity in the reciprocal table of elements. So the first one is flesh, so it's kind of like I kind of just ranked it at first just to kind of get a sense of how I'm gonna classify these elements and add features to this. So it's obviously more similar to the periodic table, so it's to complete the paraphrasing. So there's some sort of sense that it's easier to reciprocate the things of the flesh than even a use of a thing. The flesh-like nature of things, maybe it's this type of animalistic, wild, primal nature, or I don't know what's got this right in that way. So so even with this, I've added in 5 to 5 or so. This is the third one there, and so I decided now to make my image videos an element of sorts, sort of a funicular structure of a way, in a way. Obviously augmenting the first two a bit. I have, from the first one, gotten the deatomizer, so that's kind of like the becoming whole rather than atomized in that sense, but it's not really us. It's really maybe appropriating the atomic sense of there being atoms. Obviously the shape, or the shape is a position rather than a sort of, the shape is a element in itself, and it has different effects depending on what its shaping is, and obviously there's no consistency through a consistent shape, and so obviously there's a sense that atoms will have kind of specific shape, where this obviously is this has a reductive and negatively reducing, or at least reducing the negative, so it's harder to see, or it appears to be a boundary, but no, obviously this boundary has specific features and may let certain things through, and this obviously suggests that it may be something other than just a boundary of an atom, So it's obviously the second image video, and so we have the anchor. So this is a bit later on. There's kind of like this idea where it's reinforcing the mindset, the belief, the perception, the sense of what is true, what is being, how someone is being, so it's just anchoring that in the moment. Anchoring was being seen in the moment. So for the third one, in the five video, in the molecular theory delirium video, there was this subjective image that I kind of see as a classify it up to subjective object. It's kind of like both the first two images juxtaposed in some sort of way, to create the third image, which I call the pre-detector, which is kind of like this, which I would simply call the sense of something being like yourself, behaving in a way like yourself. So when its effects will be kind of in line with this type of it's the subject. you're the same subject, or have the same object, and everything in between. This type of sense is there. So yeah, so what I call the poly pre-detector would be the kind of opposite effects. So something that is unlike. It's kind of like the sense that there's many. So see, it can't all be you. So obviously it's unlike. It's kind of like unlike you, in the sense which I can't really think of a. It's not so much familiarity or similarity, in the sense that it is at least functioning for other people. Obviously, it's not like you're seeing yourself through this element as behaving like yourself. You're not seeing your own body. It's kind of a distinction between yourself and another that would be affecting you in the same way, regardless of who it was that suffered some sort of event or effect. So someone reacting to a situation in the same way that you did, obviously it's affecting you in a way you experiencing this, or you hearing about this, or this being seen as a potential. So you can go on next to the probabilistic elements, where simply the fields of study, any kind of large a significant body of work, kind of with a name, kind of like economics, or like finance, physics, science, arts and stuff like that, where seeing them as an element, kind of emphasizing this probabilistic nature, that probabilistic like it helps you determine what you want to, how much you know, obviously, and then many other things in that type of way. They have a probabilistic. Obviously, there's a kind of mathematical sense of probability, and astronomical, with astrological, I guess, with the planets, using them to determine the probability of things, and obviously this must be just a sense of it being in every single other field of study. Maybe not in so much of a direct, symbolic way, but it's still there. So lastly for this, for the evolutionary section, we have the traumatic table of elements, which basically I have taken some everyday elements. So there's traumatic, like magic with a K, where it's like everyday magic. So rather than it being everyday magic, it is that kind of everyday situations that can, you could say, build up into a trauma. So it's not necessarily a massively traumatic experience, but it's a part of an experience that could become traumatic for whatever reason. Well, these traumatic reasons would be the kind of the sense where it happens. It's like this collectively deceptive. So the traumatic would at first be a sort of an appearance in a sense. So the first one is birth. So it's a creation, then it appears. Then what I call elementary list type would be the elements. The elements becoming distinct in the appearance. And after that, we have the ancestral line, kind of the history of the elements. Then the fire, and so that's a kind of cross. So it's a kind of changing the line, like it's turning corners, or crossing out, or plus adding up. So it's kind of like that. So the firing line, so it's a kind of the sense where it would be traumatic. That's how it would form, at least, even with the creation, like a point of that. There's some point, some reason why something is traumatic is how it has, I wouldn't say appeared in what your creator was in the sense when I talk about appearance. It is the point that it has been born is what traumatizes you. Going back to the psychoanalytic theory where birth trauma was kind of seen as a reason for neuroses or pathological illness, mental illness, because of the experience of birth, kind of this the sense of going back to your childhood, obviously then going back further than that to where you were more comforted, kind of, not or not, or lack thereof. Obviously there's this comparison between people that's also created, and that causes problems, or at least creates issues with mental illness. So yeah, so it kind of it follows that trend to kind of just give an example of appearances, which I will look into later on and give more information about. Should quickly going into the types of traumatic. There's the collective, so it's just like the fire, water, air, earth, kind of these kind of the sense where it's like your personal attributes. So it's like it's not collective. It's kind of like we don't share the same fire, in the sense that we don't have the same experience of fire. Like we've had a different history, blah blah blah, of fire, like the creative element, like what we can create with fire is different. So with the water and that elementary, it's kind of like water. We've had a different experience with how it's a healthy water makes us obviously swim in water, control over water with blood in the ancestral line. We have that as well. Obviously, that's quite direct to see with the deceptive. So there's kind of this concept that's similar in this Greek culture with the rod, the sword, and the added net. It's added, for. It's kind of like the sense of you being cut, kind of, even if it doesn't produce a physical symptom, even the physical sensation is kind of like, it's not deceptive. It's kind of like, this is the kind of physical sense of whatever experience you are going through. It is rod-like, cup-like, like being struck by a cup, contained by a cup, hit by a rod. And so same with detective, we have these kind of experimental variables, even with using the term experiment. We can add maybe subject, object for these types of. So it's kind of like we don't use these to detect. These aren't what are detected. These are kind of things we use, kind of categorized things we have detected, but these aren't detecting. Or they don't have any detective features in it. They're kind of like containers. No, it's just detectors. They're not detectors. So the same with the creative, the senses, and even that's like added the mind attributes of positive and negative. These aren't the creators. We don't create with these things. You could say maybe even it could be our organs added into this or not, and these could be considered creators. Obviously, this is something that I am creating to look into. And with the protective, it's kind of like we don't protect with our facial expressions. Simple. With the corrective, it's kind of like it isn't correct to say that we are part of any specific ethnic, or at least apparent physiological group. This is kind of just the way I'm saying it. First, like, it isn't correct to say that obviously there's an ancestral element. It's kind of like there's a mix in things, and even to the extent that there is obviously environmental factors being shared between different species, and even to the extent which there is not, maybe there is still single factors that are shared between others, and there's always a way of, obviously it's just kind of like the category to which the corrective measure is imposed, or which the corrective phenomena isn't in these like ethnic groups or physiological groups, phylogenetic groups. So yeah, with the directive, kind of the same thing. Like the direction is kind of like I said up instead of like forward, because obviously forward has a more of a something notion, but I mean it could be forward as well, to be honest. Like the direction. So obviously saying it's me saying it is not these things, so it does not become traumatic. Kind of in the sense that it does, but it cannot become traumatic. You can prevent it from becoming traumatic. Kind of in the sense that obviously you can make something more magical. You can learn about magic in that way by picking up the everyday cues of people, blah blah blah. So with the sense of the directive again, I have confused and confounded. So I kind of like I added on a cross with confound, because it's kind of like they give you something and it puts you in that state. But with confused, they take something away and they put you in that state. So with attentive, you have like be, fast, go. It's like kind of these things aren't really attending to the phenomena. These aren't really attentive factors, but I kind of have this kind of overlaying or containing effects, but aren't necessarily there. Necessarily are elements that can be used to prevent a situation from becoming traumatic in this way. Obviously, I've done that quite for a while. Yeah. So I just said this is the evolutionary table situation, so I've kind of just paraphrased out of this, where I can still add things within this underneath the evolutionary things, and have given it a kind of relatives in a sense to where they are distinct. It's kind of distinct ways that the periodic table's elements are obviously being used, but aren't necessarily being studied in the light of, but they are in terms of their effect on like evolution, their ability to create other elements other than like the standard model things, or also use them to develop technology, obviously other technological elements. So I've added evangelism, kind of this sense of kind of like there's an emotional intelligence, which isn't exactly all emotions. It is kind of a restricted sense of emotions still, so I wouldn't really call it emotions there, but it is the more evolved state, the obviously higher evolved being, the kind of sense of them existing, and obviously us not needing to communicate with them because they perform some of the higher order or more evolved actions, some of the, so whatever it could be seen as necessary. Obviously kind of like us with or they obviously can determine our behaviour, and they have adapted to us and we have not adapted to their behaviour, in the sense that we could suffer their behaviour. So obviously suffering is like they're kind of moving away from us. It's kind of like they've kind of created a distance from us, kind of like they've kicked us away, like we flicked a fly. And intimacy, obviously, it's like kind of they're coming towards us, like saying if we are stroking our cat, kind of that type of sense, obviously. But since that this is shared, as obviously maybe they want to pin us together like a game serial sort of Cupid situation, maybe. The same with we're not really saying we'll see something moving with. I'll just move past intelligence, so it's kind of like it follows this type of trend where it is the symbolism is kind of trying to connect the terms. So I'll just start with, I don't explain these all too thoroughly. It's kind of self-explanatory, really. The intelligence is kind of like the sense that the higher evolved being is communicating. So the sound wave coming from below is just kind of like the sense that is communicating. And so elegance would be kind of the sense that they are getting close together amongst themselves. So it's kind of like you're seeing them working together. And so even with existence, I'm suggesting that the sense of your own existence is kind of the space that they give you to exist. So it's kind of like they move apart and it gives you space to exist, kind of like the forest that we don't use, or the wildlife areas that we're nature reserve, kind of that type of sense of the space that we moved away and we've given them existence in that type of, or we are provided for existence in that type of way, So other than the table of evolution, which I'm also calling tabulation, so it's like making tables, it's a kind of putting what is necessarily on your plate in a table, kind of what is on your table, what you have to offer, what is able to be put on your table, what is there to be consumed or can be assumed evolutionary. I mean, it's not so much necessary to call it evolutionary if it is presented as a table, in a sense that it is an understandable table showing relations between the things you have been able to understand, at the points you're able to understand, seeing their relations, obviously giving you the sense of how much you understand every element on the table as it is presented. Obviously, in a sense, it's kind of like every element that you are able, the table does contain every element that you are able to understand, kind of in that sense. But that is what evolution is. So we have the meaningful tables, and just call it meaningful rather than there being elements. So the things contained in the table aren't really separate elements, but they're kind of just presented in a way so you can see how the elements are affected in a more meaningful way in relation to each other. There's industrialization, or what I can call differentiation, distinct from evolution, kind of in its way of creating relatable elements, or the way it relates to elements, in a way that the industry differentiates their elements from each other by creating products kind of to be used in complementary ways, obviously creating different niches, different habitats with industrial methods, new ways of living. So that we have the table of citizenship, one also calling participation, kind of the where obviously like when you're in a group or when you're part of something, obviously you relate to things differently from, say, if you were trying to overcome something or trying to create something in a more practical way, in a solely practical way. That's citizenship, participation. You also have the meaningful table of armament, what I'd call conceptualization, in the sense that your armory is kind of like the defensive capabilities in a broader sense, where it's not solely military, but kind of like your honor, or what I call name, in the agreements in that type of way. There's kind of like something that has your name on it, you've agreed to, kind of in that sense, and rather than that in a kind of potential way or in a feminine way, there's a belief, but associating it with yourself as a thought or a name, someone's name or the similar name to that belief. You'll see a thought, and so in the same way, a thought shared is potential. Kind of the removal, so it's kind of like disagreement, which I'm not kind of learning because it's like agreement anyway. So the anger kind of thinking about disagreeing, thinking about the potential of disagreeing. But obviously, there's as this potential manifests, as you then think, you and someone else is thinking about getting rid of an agreement between yourself, between like these people. It's the same. It's like the same. It's between them. I mean, I could have shown both ways, like an agreement with both their names on it, or at least one of their names. Obviously, if they had one of them on and they're both thinking about it, and it's getting one of them to get rid of the agreement, then there's that sense of deception that I'm kind of seeing. That's kind of what I'm trying to communicate. And so we have the table of embodiment. So it's the armament and conceptualization. Obviously, is the reinforcement of an appearance or potential in that type of way. So embodiment is the same as delineation. It's kind of like not restricting it in a in that type of way, where it's delineated is showing the inner workings in that type of sense. So we have the love and hate, etc. And so with that, I kind of have them in a sort of meaningful strata. And so maybe another associated group that can kind of be used to show the elements of it is kind of with the what I call the unique aspects. So maybe have something similar to that, where it's like defining activities, which I may get into later, and the unique aspects of things like masculine and feminine, where kind of like every individual has a different understanding of them, or is unique to them in a different way, and they have different aspects of them. So the same with their relationship with mature things, perverting things to pervert, kind of kind down. In that type of way, it's a tree is supposed to grow, but maturing is like it's growing. But that is more mature, or the defined sense, where it's kind of similar there in life, where there is life, there's kind of something behind the movement, where there is movement, and there may not actually be an understanding of the life there, and there's no sense of any life within some sort of movement, even if it's like a vacuum, let's say. So yeah, with that, finally, we can go back to the sounds of the periodic table, showing the kind of philosophical notion of nature of reality being somewhat similar to how it's taken about the Greek culture, where they have these theories of forms of government. It was like an aristocracy, so it was like kind of like the top one, and it felt like democracy, oligarchy, democracy, something like that. And lastly is the tyranny, etc. And so looking at aristocracy, it's kind of like the etymological understanding of the term is kind of like the best fit, the rule of the best fit. So aristocle could also mean best born. So it's the best fit, the best born, so it's the best created, the best products, the best forever, the best beginning, middle, the best end. So in a sense where it's like there's cause and effect within this group, so it's the principle behind something that could always be the best fit for some sort of situation. Like everything obviously has a cause and effect, kind of in the same way you can see everything has a. I'm not even gonna say everything, but at least from an individual's perspective, they are experiencing with these things, asserting themselves. They are asserting through these means, as if something is an effect, something is, some smoke and mirrors, a distraction. They're asserting these things, and in this way, it's creating some sort of hierarchical order in the way that it is a best fit for this individual, beyond even evolutionarily or meaningfully, but I wouldn't say relatively is beyond, but obviously beyond the relations in the sense to where it is manipulatable, is most principally manipulated. If it's manipulated somewhere in the elements, it has to be manipulated in one of these means as well. And obviously then you can see how the elements relate to each other more so in this way again. So yeah, so it's the best. So it's the kind of like I was using the most high symbolism for the evolutionary stuff. So it's kind of like it's kind of like Christian, Catholic, whatever, but adding on to that, building over that for now, because obviously it's the kind of like there's a Greek Latin sense of the periodic table. So we have the best born like equaling the most high, so rather it being like the most high, somehow he rose above something, but no, it's kind of like the sense that the creator was the first thing that existed, and so the first thing that existed was kind of like born in the best way, because it was born kind of for everyone, or at least from the essence of everything that was born afterwards, or at least created. Kind of the sense of birth doesn't have to be necessarily from something, but it may just be the sense of a beginning, in as much as that's seen as significant, obviously for us in this way. It does seem like being born is a pretty significant experience, how it depends on how it went. So there's that. It's the best born's periodic tablet.